Welcome to another Proof is Possible Minute, everybody. I'm Corbett Lunsford. Today I'm going to take a question from a consumer who's writing from Denver. So he wrote to me saying, hi, we're about to buy a house here in Denver, and I had a couple questions. He's been listening to the podcast for years. And by the way, if you haven't listened to that, it's buildingperformancepodcast.com. You can get it on iTunes as well. So his question is, assuming that a first-time buyer probably will not have access to the sophisticated diagnostics described on your podcast during their search, what are some key things to look for that would indicate a high or low performance? Great question. First thing is, don't always assume that the diagnostics are not available. Many of the diagnostics that we talk about, like for example blower door testing, duct tightness, are actually required by code on new homes in several states at this point, and they'll be required on more and more states as we go throughout the years. Second thing is that a lot of companies will give this information, they just don't put it necessarily on the sticker for things. So for example, in the HVAC system, if you check out the sticker that's on the side of the HVAC system, generally it's called the return plenum. That's where the air comes back into the system. Someone will have put a sticker there, and they'll show you how often that system has been maintained. That's one way to just check, and this is something that a home inspector can do. The other thing is to go ahead and peek up into the attic. When you are in the attic, you'll be sitting in a hatch, right? You don't have to actually climb all the way up in there, but you basically get up so that you can put your arms on the floor of the attic and you look around. First thing that you'll notice is there insulation or is there not? And if there is, how much is there? And of course, you have a tape measure with you because you always do that when you inspect a home that you're potentially going to buy. And you're going to measure the depth of the insulation. Most places in the country, 12 inches is pretty good. 16 inches is stellar. So if you've got 16 inches of insulation, the second thing you're going to do is not just stop there. You're going to actually move aside some of that insulation without making a huge mess in the hole that you're sticking yourself up through. And you're going to look at what's called the top plate of the interior wall. Right next to where you are in that hatch, there is a wall that's in the floor that you just came from. Because they don't put attic hatches in the middle of a wide open room, it would look silly. So you're in a hallway or in a closet. So you find the wall that's closest to you and push away the insulation so that you can see the top of where that comes through the floor of the attic. And if that is not sealed, meaning it has some kind of a visible gasket-like or foam-like substance that's sealing the edges of where the top plate comes in contact with the drywall on both sides of it, then you know that probably everywhere else in the attic it's also not sealed. So that could give you a pretty good indication of whether the attic floor is going to be an air leakage problem or not. So those are some few things. Now, of course, I'm a testing guy. So most of the stuff that we're talking about you cannot do visually. There's just no way to do it. Even me, who's been into hundreds and hundreds of homes looking at this stuff, I even need to run the tests. So you can't really get by without the tests. Second thing is, utility bills can shed some light on energy efficiency, but how can someone gauge issues like air quality or moisture control? Great question. If you step into a place, I've actually been called out to jobs where a developer client of mine has either run into high energy bills while the unit is unoccupied, while they're just staging it and showing it, or major air quality or draft problems. One of them was that every time somebody would come into the place, and of course you would either remove your shoes or put on booties to cover your shoes because it's such a nice setup, you would be able to feel, even through your shoes, that the floor next to the fireplace is freezing cold because, of course, they started showing this place in January. So they had to bring someone in before the place even got bought to fix these performance issues. The good news is that if you're shopping for a new home issues will generally show up a lot faster than existing home issues. So if you're in a brand new home, hang out in it for a little bit and just kind of get the sense. Don't rush through and see everything. Really move from room to room, feeling whether the temperature changes in certain parts of the house. If you go upstairs, does it get warmer as you go upstairs? If you are in a bathroom, is it freezing cold in there because they've put too many registers based on how much heat or cooling that room is losing to the outside? All these things can indicate to you whether they actually did calculations, which leads to whether they actually did performance testing, which leads to whether or not this place was actually built according to any standards at all. So those are the kinds of things that you can look at. His next question is, what factors influence a residential building's suitability for a high-performance retrofit? Are there factors that would influence the ROI of a retrofit for a modest home, and how could a homebuyer identify those? Great question. The answer to this is, if you've got any unfinished spaces, for example, in Chicago, we'll have a lot of basements that are unfinished, meaning the brick walls, the foundation walls, are exposed. That is good. That's your friend. So you definitely like those kinds of places. Generally, if every space in the house is finished, meaning it's covered with drywall and it all looks really nice, to me, it generally means that they have covered up all the mistakes that would have been evident if it was all uncovered. So I always would shop for a place that has as much accessibility as possible. Second thing there is what the house is made out of. If you're moving into a condo, for example, and the condo is solid brick, like the condo building that we have been living in for the last 11 years, there's very little that you can do to that type of a building because of the way that it is constructed. So knowing as much about that kind of thing as possible, if the house is covered in siding and the window depth, the depth of the windowsills is about 4 or 6 inches, that can indicate to you that the house is made out of framing, meaning it's stick framed, which means that it's pretty easy to get in there and get at all the cavities. If it's a lot thicker than that, then it could indicate that there's things like cinder block, which they'll also call CMU, which is concrete masonry unit. It's a cinder block, or brick, or any combination of those, in which case they actually limit the size of the cavity that you can squeeze insulation into and that you can access to do things like air sealing. So those are some of the things that you could look for in that case. Also, attics are easier to retrofit than vaulted ceilings are. So if you've got a house that's got all cathedral ceilings, it's going to be more of a pain. Now, if the roof needs to be replaced, then you have the access through the top. Since you're going to need to replace that roof anyway, you can get at it from the other side. But those are some basic things. Accessibility is a big deal. His next question is, do you have suggestions about how to assemble your team, meaning realtors, inspectors, and appraisers, to help identify an entry-level home based on current or future potential? What skills or expertise would you consider important? So his last question here is a critical one, because having people on your team that know what they're doing is the most important thing. So the first thing is, realtor-wise, you can look for a realtor that has a designation called green. So even though that's sometimes not construed with high performance in the same way, it's the designation that the National Association of Realtors gives to realtors who know some at least about this. At least they know what they don't know. And that's when they can rope in other experts who do know this stuff. So the NAR green designation, so you're looking for a green designated realtor. And also you can request an appraiser, and this is very important. You request an appraiser who has the green designation as well. Because if they do not have that designation, they are not technically qualified to assess whether any home has these certain criteria. Now, that being said, both of those people do not have the kind of expertise that someone who is a black belt in Fall Fast Track would have to be able to appropriately assess whether a home already is home performance, whether it can use some more improvements to achieve a better home performance, etc. So those two people are important, but then after that, you're going to want to have someone to come in to test concurrently with the home inspector. The home inspector looks at the static state of the home. Here's what it's made out of, here's what the equipment is, here's what the finishes are, etc., etc. It's all what it is in outside of time. A home performance professional, which is someone that you would search for by Googling home performance and then the name of the city that you're searching on, or energy auditor can be sometimes what people will call themselves when they know this stuff. You can search for those people and then bring them in to test. And those two people will make a whole picture because, of course, the static state is important, but also the dynamic state of the house is very important. And the dynamic state is tested with things like blower doors and duct tightness testers and pressure testing and airflow testing and moisture meters, etc., etc. So all of that stuff is really important. And I'd say that the team aspect, if you're looking for someone specific, you can look for the certain certifications, like, for example, BPI stands for Building Performance Institute. There are people who are certified by that. Sometimes, and I've trained a lot of BPI certified professionals, those people do not actually know a whole lot about how to assess this stuff because they get certified for a specific purpose, and then they don't necessarily do a lot of the testing. Also, HERS raters, which stands for Home Energy Rating System. Again, likewise, a certification doesn't always mean that you have the extended abilities to be able to do the advanced testing to find out what you're looking for when you're asking questions like this. But if you want to meet any of the fall fast track black belts, feel free to reach out to me and tell me where you are in the country, and I can hook you up with somebody who's been through my 6-week training on this stuff, and we can definitely get you hooked up with the right person who's closest to you. So I hope that this has answered your questions. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and I hope that everyone else who's been watching this has learned something about how to shop for a new home or how to inform their clients and their home buyers in their areas about what they need to know in order to move forward well.